Hey everyone. I figured you probably all missed me so much by now, I decided that I'd make my own videos. So one, you can see me and hear my voice that you probably missed so much. So the first thing we're going to do is a quick volume of cylinders review. I know that was the first thing that we did prior to our distance learning beginning. I just want to make sure that there aren't any issues with that. And then we'll get into finding dimensions and those 5 questions that I gave you for yesterday's assignment. So the first thing I have here is my cylinder. If you look at the cylinder, you notice that we have a height of 6 centimeters, and it's always good to look to see if you're given the radius of the diameter. So looking at this, obviously I have my center, and then from the center it goes out to the edge of the circle, and that's covers half the distance of my one circle, so I know that this is obviously going to be my radius. So the first thing that you should do is write your formula, which we now know for a cylinder. It's volume equals pi radius squared times the height. And then all we're going to do is fill in what they give us to find the volume. So I'm going to bring down my pi times my radius, we said is 2 squared, times our height of 6. Following our order of operations, we know that we have to do the exponent first. So I have 2 times 2, which is going to give me 4. So I'm going to bring down pi times 4 times 6. And then what I like to do is I save pi for last, so I'm going to do 4 times 6 first, which is going to give me 24, and I'm going to bring down my pi next to it, 24 pi. And like we saw on Monday, sometimes they leave our answer in terms of pi. So if your answer, if we're doing multiple choice, if it has pi in it, we stop here and I just add my dimensions. So one answer could be 24 pi centimeters cubed, because we're talking about volume, so obviously we have to cube our units. Sometimes though, with our answers, we have to go one step further, which means I'm going to multiply 24 times pi, and I know that we know for pi we're using 3.14. So in my calculator, I'm going to clear it, and then I'm just going to put in 24 times, I know we have a pi symbol, but we're just rounding pi to our hundredths place, so I'm just going to type times 3.14 and hit equals. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to round to the nearest tenth. So looking at what I have here, it says 75.36, so I'm going to round that 3 up, because the 6 is telling the 3 to round up to 4. So rounding to the nearest tenth, my answer for my volume would be volume equals 75.4, and then it would be centimeters cubed. So those are my 2 possible answers. It just depends on what the question is asking us to find. Sometimes it tells us to find it in terms of pi, so I would leave my first answer that I have here. However, if it asks us to round to the nearest tenth or to the nearest whole number, that means we are not leaving it in terms of pi, so then we're going to have to multiply by 3.14, and that would give me this answer here. Looking at our second example, I'm going to have to fix my document camera. So if you notice, looking at our second example, I'm going to write my formula again. We have volume equals pi r squared times the height. I know that my height is 5 inches. However, looking at my circle on top, you notice that we have a line that's going from one end of the circle all the way to the other through the radius, through the center. So we know that this is not the radius, this is the diameter. Sometimes the problem is trying to trick us, and they give us the diameter, and what they want us to do is take this diameter and plug it in for the radius. And we know that's wrong, because I do not have a d in my formula for diameter, I have r for radius. So I need to take this 10 inches, and I need to find the radius. If I know my diameter is 10, to find the radius, if you remember, diameter is 2 times the radius. So what we then know is that the radius is going to be the diameter divided by 2. So if my diameter is twice as long as my radius, to find the radius, I'm just going to take 10, my diameter, divided by 2, which gives me 5. So I'm going to cross out this, and I'm going to turn it into 5 inches because that's my radius. Now that I've found the radius and I have my height, I'm just going to plug it into my formula. So I have pi times my radius 5 squared times my height, which is also 5. And then again, following our order of operations, the first thing I'm going to do is 5 squared, which again is 5 times 5. Bring down pi times 25 times 5. And we know 5 times 25 is going to give us 125, so I'm going to bring down 125 pi. Again, if the question is asking us to leave it in terms of pi, it means I'm keeping pi in my answer, and I'm just going to add my units and cube them. So this could be one possible answer, or if it asks us to round, then that means I'm going to take 125 and multiply it by 3.14. So again, in my calculator, I'm going to clear it. I'm going to plug in 125 times 3.14, hit enter, and we have 392.5. So it's already rounded to the nearest tenth. I don't need to do anything else except write down my volume. So we have volume equals 392.5, and then my units would be inches cubed, and I'll box that. So again, this one here with pi could be an answer. If they're asking us for terms of pi, we leave pi in our answer and just bring down our units. Or if they're asking us to round to the nearest whole number, nearest tenth, nearest hundredth, that means we're multiplying by 3.14, and that would be my final answer. Alright, so that's our quick review just on how we find the volume of a cylinder, whether we're given the radius up top with the first example, or if we're given the diameter. Alright, the next thing we're going to talk about, and I know that you looked at the videos yesterday, sometimes we're given the volume and one dimension of our cylinder, and we have to find the missing dimension. So you know that our formula, volume equals pi r squared times the height, I have two dimensions. I have my radius that we're using, and we have the height. So if they give me the volume, that means I'm looking for one of the missing dimensions. I'm looking for either the radius or the height. A lot of times they'll leave a variable in next to our cylinder with either h or r, looking at these two examples. Sometimes they might change the variable to be x or something like that, and we just have to ask ourselves, are we missing the radius or are we missing the height? So looking at example number 1, I know I have my radius, it's 5 inches. I know I have volume, it's 300 inches cubed, and I'm missing, right next to it, it says h for my variable, so obviously we're missing the height. So all I'm going to do is take my radius that they gave me, take the volume that they gave me, I'm going to plug it into the same formula that we're using for our volume of a cylinder, and we're just going to find the missing dimension instead of the volume like we already did. So I'm going to plug for V, I'm going to plug in 300 equals, bring down my pi, radius we have 5, and we're squaring it, and then I'm going to bring down times h, because h is what we're looking for. I don't have the height, I need to find that. So in order to do that, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do 5 squared. So I'm going to bring down 300 equals pi times 5 squared, which gives us 25, times h. And then the next thing we're going to have to do is multiply 25 times 3.14. So in my calculator, I'm going to take 25, multiply it by pi, which we're using 3.14, and hit equals, and we get 78.5. So I'm going to bring down 300 equals, we just simplified pi times 25 to 78.5 times h. And then our last step, we know that h is multiplying 78.5, and I want to get h by itself because we're solving for the missing dimension. So I'm going to separate the left and the right side of my equal sign. To get h by itself, I'm going to do the inverse of multiply, which we know is divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 78.5. We're going to show what cancels, bring down what's left, and then in our calculator, 300's on top, so I'm going to do 300 first. Obviously we're dividing, and then we're going to divide by 78.5. Hit equals and see what that gives us. So you'll notice we have a 3, and then after the decimal I have a lot of numbers. So obviously I'm not going to write that my answer is 3.821656051. Alright, we're just going to round to the nearest tenth. So that means I'm looking at the 2, because that's in the hundreds place. The 2 tells the 8 what to do. Obviously 2 is 4 or less, so if you remember we're going to let 8 rest, and it's just going to stay the same. So I'm going to bring down that my height is going to be 3.8, and because it's a dimension, I'm just going to write inches for my units. I'm not cubing those units because it's not the volume. When we're missing a dimension, we do not cube our units, we just bring down whatever units we have. Just like the radius, you'll notice, is just inches, so our height also is just going to be in terms of inches. Alright, so that's what we do if we're missing our height. And then I'm going to do one more review if we're missing the radius. So we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to bring down my formula, volume equals pi r squared times height. I know my volume's 150, so underneath V I'm going to replace it with 150 equals pi times, obviously we don't know what the radius is, they put r where our radius value should be, so I'm just going to bring down r squared next to pi times our height is 10. So the only thing that we can do is I can multiply pi, 3.14, times 10 to simplify the right hand side of the equal sign a little bit further. So I'm going to bring down 150 equals pi times 10 is 3.14 times 10. So in your calculator we have 3.14 times the height of 10 equals, we get 31.4. So really we're just moving the decimal point one place to the right. So what we did here was pi times 10, and we got 31.4, and now I'm going to bring down my radius squared. So we have two more steps that we have to do to undo this problem to get the radius by itself. Again, I'm going to separate the left and the right of the equal sign. Right now the radius squared is being multiplied by 31.4, excuse me. So I'm going to divide both sides by 31.4 first. I'm going to show what cancels, bring down radius squared equals, and then in my calculator I'm going to do 150 divided by 31.4, hit equals, and we should get about 4.7 repeating. So I'm just going to round that to 4.8. So I have radius squared equals 4.8, and if you remember from our last unit, the inverse of squaring a number, hopefully in your head you're thinking take the square root. So what we're going to do, because radius is being squared right now, I'm going to take the square root of both, which means that this square is going to cancel. So we're left with the radius equals, and then the last thing you have to do, if you remember, to find the square root in your calculator, we're going to hit the second key, then we're going to hit x squared, and then I'm going to plug in 4.8, hit equals, and we get about 2.19, so I'm just going to round that to 2.2. So our radius would be about 2.2, and then it would be centimeters for our review. So just to recap, we reviewed how to find the volume, and then how to find our missing dimensions. So notice we're using the same formula every single time, but when we're missing our dimensions, we're kind of undoing that formula to find either the height or the radius. So I hope this helps. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're actually going to review those 5 questions that I assigned yesterday. Hopefully you have your work and we'll go over that. Alright? See you later.